Welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast series, where we address challenges and ideas for early-stage and entrepreneurial business leaders. Your host today is Dave Cofaro, Interim President and CEO of the Greater Irvine Chamber.
Hello, folks. This is Dave Cofaro with the Greater Irvine Chamber of Commerce, and this is our first in our series of podcasts, so we're really excited to have you with us. As you know, the Greater Irvine area and Orange County overall is home to a lot of entrepreneurial businesses. We've got early stage companies, we've got large companies that were once startups and they grew up here. And we're also home to a lot of really famous brand names, companies like Massimo, Alteryx, Boot Barn, Andro, Silence, as well as a bunch of great gaming companies here. We've got med tech companies and other startups. Starting a business is really an exciting thing, and it's also challenging. So with this in mind, today we're visiting with Cynthia West. Cynthia is director of the Leatherby Center for Entrepreneurship and Business Ethics at the Chapman University Arduous School of Business and Economics. And in addition to her work in academia, Cynthia has lived the founder and entrepreneurial lifestyle. So she brings us a treasure trove of experience to this conversation. So Cynthia, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here.
So the focus of our conversation today is on what it means to be a founder and an entrepreneur in Orange County. So Cynthia, what are some of the reasons that people decide that it's time to create a business?
That's a great question. I'll first talk a little bit about my own personal experience. I was a part of 4 tech startups in Silicon Valley. And one of the reasons that I left corporate, I had been working in, I call it my corporate cushy job as a young person. And I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. There was a lot of great training that happens in bigger corporations, but I was being told, hey, stay in your swim lane. Like, that's not your area. And I felt like I had an opportunity to be person number 5 at my first startup. And I thought, well, here's a chance to spread my wings and try something a little bit more different and challenging. And when you're at a startup, you get to actually perform more than one specific role. So that was one of the reasons I left for my first startup. A second reason I think is that people often, they get an idea and they've been kind of kicking it around for a while. And then they think, well, if I don't take advantage of the opportunity now, I'm not going to ever do that. And I think, one thing is that people don't want to have regrets at the end of their life. They'd rather regret trying it and failing than, never having tried it. So I think that sometimes people just sort of finally get that push that they need. Other times a person might get laid off of a job and think, well, this is a perfect time to start a consulting business, and might end up being what we call a solopreneur consulting shop. So they have a lot of experience to offer and people seek them out as advisors. And so often they'll kick off their own practice, and sometimes that'll grow into something larger. And sometimes it'll be, no, I just want to keep, to myself and have my own, be only responsible for myself. I'd say one of the other great examples why somebody might start a business too is that it might be a parent looking for a more flexible working situation. I mean, certainly my mother, she was an English teacher. She was also an advisor in a college environment, and there were 2 of us, and then she had 2 more children. So she had 4 children underfoot, and really thought, okay, this is a perfect time to do my own thing. She ended up buying a franchise and then became an employer to 8 other women. And so she ran that business out of the house. She could keep an eye on the 2 younger children. And I think that it's a really great, way to kick things off, particularly if you're looking for a lot of flexibility. And this was, the days before the pandemic taught us we could actually work from home. But right. Certainly there's a lot of companies that would like everybody to return to office. So having your own business lets you have that flexibility too.
You mentioned that, and it's hard to believe that it's been like 4 years since the pandemic started, but so many great things came out of that experience, right? It was not a pleasant time. but it's so much different today for entrepreneurs that want to start a new company because you've got more flexibility to be able to work from home and think differently about the way you go to market with something than pre-pandemic or really maybe even any time in history. So how can somebody with a creative and innovative or maybe a disruptive idea decide whether or not it's a business?
Yeah, we get that a lot. So here at the Leatherby Center for Entrepreneurship, we emphasize on something that's called customer discovery. And so that is really making sure that your great idea, your great innovation is actually solving a real world problem. So we encourage our entrepreneurs to go out, ask a lot of open ended questions. Those are the non yes or no questions. So an open ended question that's going to get you more of an explanation and to inquire about that problem you think you're solving or that gap you think your product or service is filling. So we ask them to get out there and ask those questions. And many times the entrepreneur finds out that they need to pivot their idea. So what they thought the original problem is not actually the challenge that their potential customers are experiencing. So we asked them to go out and interview 25 potential customers that fit the target, not friends and family, because friends and family will tell you what you want to hear. So you have to step out of that comfort zone and talk to people that might actually buy your product, who will talk straight. Ask those, have those questions queued up, ask the questions, write them down, don't interrupt, don't interfere, don't persuade or sell, just try to get the responses, and then go home, think about them, ponder those responses, and make sure you're actually filling a gap. Now, on the other hand, we all know it was Henry Ford who said, hey, if I asked my customers what they'd wanted, they would have said faster horses. So it's a good idea to get a lay of the land. And when I was involved in the early MP3 player market, I was reaching out to potential partners like Sony, HarperCollins, Random House, MCA Records, and other people. And this was in like 1994, 10 years before the iPod came out. And I would say that the greater majority of those folks couldn't envision a world where even the internet bandwidth would be wide enough for music to go over, and be downloaded. I said, stop. Don't worry about that part. That part will come. It will all happen. So there are times when people can't really see your vision. You'll just have to take that leap of faith and kind of move forward. And you certainly can't let all the existing businesses who feel threatened by that change, stop you. And so part of that is just that leap of faith after you've done your homework.
So how do you find that balance, though? Because you're hitting on something I think is so important for entrepreneurs, for startups or founders. You do the market research, but sometimes the market that you're researching doesn't even exist yet, right? I had this experience with a startup. I co-founded a company that does, it's an app-based estate settlement tool. So if you're familiar all with estate settlement, when somebody passes away, there's a bunch of work that has to be done, regardless of how large the estate is. For very wealthy people, banks will do it, attorneys will do the work, but for the majority of people, you do it yourself. And there is no market that had been defined when we started this. So we tried to do our research and there was really nothing, right? So how do you find that place where you say, okay, I know there's something here, but the data aren't going to show it yet because here is not as defined as we'd like it to be yet. How do you get there?
Yeah, that's a great position. In fact, I would say for all 4 of the startups I was involved with, there was actually no third-party research or data proving any of it. And so my role, I was always on the sales and marketing side. So my role was to go out and actually figure out what the message was going to be. What's going to be the communication that will resonate. And so a lot of times you're, on the one hand, you're sort of throwing it against the wall like spaghetti and seeing what sticks.
Right.
And other times you're trying to figure out an analogy that will resonate. So it's when they can't understand exactly what is going to be built because it hasn't been built yet, is to try to find an analogy of like, well, remember when, dot, 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 this particular thing didn't exist yet, electric cars didn't exist yet, but somebody had a vision of it. And it's a little bit like that. So you have to try to find the analogy that also kind of sticks with them.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's selling the vision. And that's where, I tell my students too, a lot of the time they say, well, I don't really have an innovative idea. I mean, how do I get involved in a startup? And there's always a need in a startup for people that can communicate the vision, can kind of figure out what the messaging is. There are also roles for finance people because somebody's got to do the books and pay the bills.
Right.
Legal folks. I mean, so they don't have to be the one with the brilliant idea. They could actually still be a part of a startup. So.
Yeah. So part of what you're talking about, the way I'm interpreting it, is there's a certain amount of courage that it takes to go out and start something, right? To build something new, because you talked about the leap of faith, and there you got to have some courage there. There's a perception that founders have a higher risk tolerance than other people. Is that a fair perception, or is there another way to sort of understand the founder's mindset?
It's so interesting because I was teaching a course here at Chapman in the fall that's really Entrepreneurship 101. And we walk through all of those elements. And in the textbook that we used, basically there were a couple of data points that said, no, in fact, entrepreneurs are not the high-risk gamblers that we think they are. There was a study from Strategic Entrepreneurship Journal that found basically the truth is that entrepreneurs are moderate risk takers, as are most people. And then that was kind of followed up by a second study, Hartford's small business study, which had 79% of the entrepreneurs describe themselves as conservative rather than risky. So where we think it comes from, the idea that there are these high risk takers, is that the job is highly unstructured. And it's not like you say, here's the job description, let's go fill it. As the original founder, chances are, if you're alone at the beginning, you're going to be doing, all of the accounting, all of the selling, all of the product development. You're going to be doing everything until you can afford to hire out. So it's a very unstructured job compared to like corporate rank and file employees. And then on the second thing is that these tend to be people, I think, rather than saying, oh, they're high risk takers, is that they're people that sort of strive for big challenges, and put pretty big goals in front of themselves. And they like the high of kind of overachieving on those goals. So I think it's those things that then get mixed in with the idea that they're taking all these risks,
Yeah.
So the other thing that I learned was that, one of the sharks, Kevin O'Leary, he loves investing in women-run startups. Why? Because he's run his data analysis and he's found that while the women are a little less risk taking, they go bankrupt less than the male-run startups because they're not out there winging it like wild cowboys. So I thought that was kind of an interesting statement. You can Google that, and it's something that's out there.
So speaking of winging it like wild cowboys, generally in startups, there's this drive to achieve the minimum viable product and then go to market. So once we've got the MVP, we're ready to go to market. What's the definition of an MVP, and is its creation a strategy in and of itself?
Yeah, it's funny how many, I would say, in my experience, a lot of times the product development person or the CTO or the founder who's ever creating the product never kind of feels like it's ready to go out to market. Not never, but one of the challenges is saying, it's, what, that's enough. Let's get something out there and test it out. So there is a tendency to be, perfectionist and, we're never quite there. I do think MVP, there's not just one definition. I think it certainly depends on the product and the nature of the industry, et cetera. But the general idea is that we say, what are the base features and functions that we can get out to market and get a few small wins, make a little bit of revenue, test it out, and then start to get some feedback from the market as to what are the additional features that they really want. Like a lot of times, the founders are wanting to kind of build the Taj Mahal, and or they think the features that they think are really cool and exciting, they find out that no, in fact, the customers don't value that bit at all. So it changes product direction and whatnot. But I think the basic idea is that you have to, as a team, come together with here are the base features that we can launch with, get a few small wins, maybe even make some revenue, prove the concept, then go out and get our funding, our angel funding, our VC, whatever it is. And really, it's all about getting that initial feedback before you go too far down the road.
How does the MVP align with the overall business strategy? You talked about the vision, and you talked about being able to sell the vision, or somebody who can tell the story of the vision. How do those fit together? Are they separate things, or how do they align?
Yeah, so for going back a ways, when we worked at Audio Highway, we had a giant platform that we had to build. Of course, we had to have the audio content that would be downloaded over the internet, go to the computer, and then ultimately go to a digital device. And none of that was created at that time. So for us, an MVP was getting audio into what's now called the cloud, downloading it to the computer and playing it back off of the computer. And then we worried about the hardware later. So, you have to kind of decide what's the easiest piece to go with in the MVP. And then, we always had product development timelines in all the startups that we were a part of. And then I would say that almost 100% of the time, we changed the timelines of our in our presentation to our board and to our funders and so forth. So there was nothing was ever set in stone. Mm-hmm. And definitely we've all experienced, even as consumers, the delays that happen in release of software, release of hardware, because when you're building something or you're making software for something that's never been done before, you don't really have an idea of how long it's going to take to build it. And much to the frustration of project managers worldwide, I'm sure. Right. But right. When you're creating some software that's never been built before, we honestly don't know how long it's going to take. So that's, I would say, part of the wiggly nature of startups is that your timelines are probably not that certain. So
love that term, the wiggly nature. Agility might be another term too, being able to adapt. So we're talking about sort of the ideas that lead up to a product and then how you go out to market with the product. At what point in the life of a new business should founders start thinking about their legal entity structure, whether they should be a sole proprietorship, a limited liability corporation, a C Corp, or something else?
Well, about a month ago, we ran a panel, legal panel here at the Leatherby Center for Entrepreneurship. And we had 4 different lawyers involved in startups, and some of them specializing in trademarks, branding, some of them intellectual property. And 100% of those people said you should figure this out sooner than later. And of course, hire a good attorney right away. So that was
no surprise there.
Yeah, no surprise there. That was their opinion. But I think even more important than figuring out your legal entity immediately is to protect the name of your company, the name of your product, and any brand that you want to promote. So they had told lots of little horror stories about how people got enamored with their product name, their company name, and hadn't run a simple trademark search. And they even went down the path of starting to market and put their website together and so forth, only to find that somebody else had that trademark and they couldn't, in fact, use it. So a lot of inexperienced entrepreneurs will say, well, oh, the domain name was available, so I'm good to go. And no, in fact, it's a lot harder to come up with a product name than you would think. And at the last startup I was involved with, which was a company out of Ireland, the company name was Drop. Well, when I joined it, I said, this is really confusing because there's something called Dropbox, and then there's this Drop e-commerce, and there are all these things that were called Drop. So we had hired an agency to go out and find a new name for us. It was a smart kitchen technology platform. So we ended up with a beautiful name called Fresco, but it took 1,500 names before we landed on a name that fit the technology and the market, and that had not already been taken in that specific industry and market. So I think it's almost more important to make sure you trademark, your company name, your brand, your taglines, all the things that you think you need, and then figure out what your legal entity structure is. And I am not a lawyer, so I would just say that the things that we teach our students in the Entrepreneurship 101 class is like figuring out what are the tax considerations that you need to think about. What are the number and types of investors that are involved in your entity? To what extent do you want your personal assets to be shielded from the business? So there are some themes that you need to think about before you can put together your legal structure. But you should be, kind of thinking about all these things pretty soon after you get going, before you make revenue, for sure.
Really, really important insight, though, because as a founder, as a startup enterprise, your assets, your ideas are your assets. Your name is your asset. So to protect those things, that's great counsel, because I can't imagine going through 1,500 names and the time that it took, which is time that could have been used for other things. And if you're a solo practitioner, or, it's just a couple of folks starting the company, time is everything. And so really great counsel.
Yeah.
Cynthia, what is a startup incubator, and what types of companies tend to be a good fit for an incubator program?
Different incubators have different missions and plans, but I'll comment on the one we're running here at Chapman University. We have a startup incubator and a startup accelerator. And the incubator is just that. It's really designed to allow any entrepreneur to take their idea and see if it's fit for launch. So we sort of have a philosophy here. We've got a wonderful gentleman running our program, Kevin Meredith, who he ran the Boeing Innovation Center, and then he ran the Innovation Center for the City of Ontario for 5 years. So we're very grateful to have his help. But he says, basically, we want one of three things to happen in our incubator, which is they either take their idea and fail fast, take the idea and pivot, or take the idea and launch. So that's what we're looking at. And for us at our incubator, we're following in the spirit of our initial endower, whose name is Ralph W. Leatherby. He was an insurance entrepreneur back in the day. He's no longer with us, but we have met his children, Joanne and Russ, and they said to us, hey, our dad, he grew up in the Depression, and the reason he gave this initial funding to your center was he just wanted people to have a better life. He didn't, he felt that one of those paths was through entrepreneurship. And it wasn't about just a tech scalable, type of Meta or Google or NVIDIA type of company. He just wanted people to explore that possibility, having grown up in the Depression. So in the spirit of that, we do support any type of company that the students or the community might have, because we don't know where the next big idea is going to come from. And so that's part of that. But I do think some incubators are very specific, like There are ones that are, hey, we're focusing on social impact, or hey, we're focusing on, high tech scalable, or hey, we're focusing on, there's one like FedTech, which is focusing on how do we improve processes through technology for the government. So there's all kinds of different incubators, but here we kind of we're talking to real young people, and so just about any idea. We've got folks in fashion, we've got folks in film, we've got folks in different mobile apps. It'd just be anything.
You mentioned the difference between an incubator and an accelerator. You talked about an incubator. What's an accelerator?
Yeah, great. We take in for our accelerator, it's if a company's already earning revenue but wants to grow exponentially. They need to start learning how to build in processes and structures that are going to allow them to grow faster and in a more meaningful way. So that's for us what our accelerator is all about.
So testing ideas versus growing faster. That's a really great contrast between the two. So at what point in a company's evolution do they need to start thinking about capital, about whether they're going to go for venture capital or other types of capital? When in the process? And then let's talk a little bit about how you make different choices of selection.
Sure. And that is not a one size fits all answer at all. And I feel like if you have, now this is just my personal advice, if you have an opportunity to grow your company organically without venture capital, that can be a really great path for you. And there's so many different examples too. We just hosted Libby Dwayne Adams, who is the co-founder of Alteryx, last week here at the center. And of course, their journey, as you may know, they'd spent 14 years growing that company organically before they went out to get venture capital funding, and then grew that exponentially. And then they went public, and then just a few weeks ago, they went private again. So I think they've been through like the whole gamut. But what I really loved about the Alteryx story, is that growing it organically for 14 years allowed them to make sure they had what we call product market fit, and making sure that platform, it's a pretty sophisticated data analytics platform, making sure the platform actually solves the problem. And I think that when they also kicked off, there weren't a lot of people that understood what data analytics even was. So the idea of getting investment maybe would have been more challenging then. But that's one example of how you can grow organically. You can kind of, they've touched on every path, if you will. Of course, the typical path that we talk about is you have an idea, and then you go to what we call the friends and family. Those are the people that love you. They give you their first $5,000, $10,000, maybe grandpa has 25,000 or whatever. So once you've exhausted friends and family, then the traditional path is we'll go to angel investors. Again, you might not have product market fit. They're sort of just hoping and praying that you'll make something of yourself. But then after that is the venture capital, and then perhaps you go public. So that's sort of the traditional path people think of. But I think that it's always a good idea to try to give it a go organically first and prove it out. You'll get a better valuation before you go to venture capital, and you won't also be, wasting your time. I think one of the other things is that, well, the last startup I was involved with, the CEO was constantly raising money. So his main job was really just raising money, because we had a very long-term play in the kitchen Internet of Things technology space. And so once you go down the path of VC, you're pretty much committed to raising money, 24/7. So that's tricky too.
Yeah, and in a way, that sort of question, as you're describing the considerations, really has to be part of your strategic plan. If you want to spend a bunch of your time out raising money and recognizing that's part of your job versus do you want to build it up organically for a while like Altrex did and then have a better valuation potentially. It's all got to be part of that strategic plan, and the decision you make early on could affect the way things turn out in the long run. So really great considerations. Um, what are some of the top challenges that founders face, and are any of those unique to the Irvine area, the Orange County area, or are they just kind of things that founders face kind of wherever they are?
Well, certainly, I think there are common things that founders face globally, and then there are some things that are super specific to Orange County. Uh, Obviously, the top, let's say the top three challenges, globally are always not enough time, not enough resources, not enough time, not enough money. So initially, when you start, you're always um, working a lot of hours and putting in, I always call it giving blood. You're putting in a lot of hours and you're not maybe paying yourself all that well, or if at all. You're maybe searching for funding, you're searching for good co-founders. There's any number of challenges that I think are fairly global. And then I think one of the biggest challenges about Orange County, and I think we're all going to try to work on this, is that compared to Silicon Valley, because I spent a good 10 years working in Silicon Valley, when you're in Silicon Valley, perhaps because it's like geographically constrained, and a lot of people are in the tech industry, you can pretty much turn around and you're in line at a coffee shop and start talking about whatever innovative or revolutionary idea you're having, and the person behind you will sort of get it in a matter of seconds or minutes. Here in Orange County, we're, I think, more geographically spread out, and we have the good part is that we have a rich number of industries. So when the dot-com bust came in 2001, Silicon Valley was quite depressed, where Orange County was, had the depth of industries where we weren't impacted as much. But the challenge for technologists, at least, and innovators in Orange County can be, you're at a networking event and you're talking to a banker or realtor who doesn't, have, it's going to take days for them to understand what your innovation is and so on. And so it's challenging because there's not that tight community feeling that you get in Silicon Valley, where it's like, yep, got it. Okay, here's how I can help you, and here are the people I can connect you with. I think here in Orange County, and I think we're gonna embark on this, right, Dave, is to let everybody know all of the resources that are available, and then somehow try to make these lines of collaboration more seamless and create more of that cohesive community that we really need down here. And not to be overly critical, but certainly it is something that other folks that have lived in both places have commented
Um, Great point, and indeed that's something we're working on together with others as well. But we want to create a community, and the chamber certainly can play a role in that. Other chambers can as well, to be able to say, okay, we know that there are certain things that are unique when you're a founder, when you're early stage, and so we want to help sort of at least have a place to discuss it, a platform for connectivity and engagement. So we are working on that. I'm glad that you brought that up. Two more questions as we're coming down the home stretch. The first one is, what are some of the more common mistakes that founders tend to make?
Oh my gosh. So many. So many mistakes. Um, I think one of the biggest challenges for entrepreneurs, and I'm sort of struggle with this myself, is that let's say you start your company, you're doing everything, and then as you hire on people, learning how to delegate and actually let go. So that can be quite challenging for a lot of entrepreneurs. And I think initially, like if they say, well, I'm terrible at finance, and they hire their first, accounting person or somebody to do the books, then that's the easy step where, okay, I can let that go because I hated that anyway. I didn't like it anyway. But then as they start to hire, let's say that person's the engineer or the technologist, and they start to hire, well, now I need a CTO, and then letting go of the areas that they feel the most expertise in, I think is quite challenging for entrepreneurs. So learning how to let go and delegate, I think, is right there at the top of the list. Maybe followed super closely by not micromanaging once you do let go, you know. And then I think the other bit is that I have worked with a few founders who only had maybe one or two work experiences before embarking on their own. And I think one of the easy traps to fall into is to not have a mentor that's your sounding board. So there's, yes, of course, you might have your board of directors, but that's not what I'm talking about. Your board of directors, of course, will act as coaches and so on if they're any good at what they're doing. But I think in addition to that, you need a sounding board that doesn't have shares in your company, but has a ton of experience in your area. Maybe it's even a paid coach where you're getting some outside advice that's not colored by any of the stakeholder influences. So I think a lot of times people that don't have a depth of experience as having worked in corporate for a bit kind of come to the table, think they know everything, and they don't have a peer to really weigh against. They really need to make sure that they get that outside coaching. And then I think the other bit is that you need to make sure you have enough time where you're not doing and executing, where you have some white space, and the white space that gives you that ability for your mind to think about creative solutions to problems and so forth. Like how many of us have had great ideas coming back from a run or a bike ride or a walk on the beach or something like that. But entrepreneurs are so busy doing all the time. It's like, how do we make sure we get enough of that white space? So those are kind of the top challenges and mistakes that we make is working too much and not, getting a little space to think through creatively.
Those are so great, so helpful for anyone listening. And having that white space is important for everyone to just be able to have quiet time to think, to strategize, to be able to invest in what's the next thing I should be focused on, those kinds of things. You also mentioned the mentor. I know that you offer mentors through your program. We also, through the Greater Irvine Chamber, if you take a look at our Business Resource Center, we have a connection to SCORE, and SCORE is a fabulous nonprofit organization that provides mentors for businesses, early stage, mature, wherever you are. I completely concur. That is such a valuable thing to do. It just helps you have that objective perspective, and hearing the things you might not hear from your investors, your partners, people who have stock in your company. You certainly won't hear it from people who report to you if you have employees. So just having that objective lens, really, really valuable. So in closing, my last question for you, Cynthia, is what one piece of advice would you offer to people that are considering starting a business in our community right now?
Can I give three? So my top
three is even better. We'll take three. I was only asking for one, but we'll take all three.
I think, well, I always say, please stay curious. Like curiosity is the best thing you can bring to the table, where you're asking why, how, and all of those non-yes or no questions and constantly learning. And the second, I think, is work on your network and keep it strong. And this is something I think working with students here, where this is the the class graduating is the class that spent a year and a half, on Zoom and so forth. So they're a little more sheltered than even others, students under normal circumstances. So we're sort of pushing them out the nest, like, let's go, you got to get your network going, because that's where the connections are going to be made. That's where your career is going to come from. That's where your venture capitalist is going to come from. And so that's number 2, work on your network and keep it strong. And then I think number 3 is just staying open to possibilities. I think in sales, we have something we call the 3-foot rule. So if you see somebody, 3 feet away from you at the elevator, you strike up a conversation, and because you never know where that person might be able to help you. It could be your next big customer, or it could be 3 connections away from your next big customer. I think that sort of combined with being curious, thinking about your network, and staying super open to possibilities, that's maybe the best advice I could give anybody, whether it's in Orange County or elsewhere.
You gave us 3 terrific ideas. I do want to comment on the network part of it, and the chamber is a fantastic way to make connections wherever you are in the evolution of your business. I heard last week, I went to a lunch, and Tom Peters, the fellow who wrote In Search of Excellence, was the speaker. And I wrote this down because it just was so powerful, and it's what you're talking about as far as the network and talking to people. But Tom said, and this guy sold 5 million books, right, on how to be an excellent company. But his comment was, all success stems from successful personal relationships. And this is as certain in the age of artificial intelligence as it was in the beginning of time. So what a great way to bring this to closure. Cynthia, fantastic points. We got 3. We only asked for 1 for closing. But I want to thank you for your time today. This is a fantastic conversation. We appreciate what you're doing, and we're glad to collaborate with you. So thank you so much, Cynthia West.
And you're welcome. It was my pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us for the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast. To stay informed about upcoming podcasts and other important business news, please subscribe to our channel or check the Greater Irvine Chamber website.